Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're taking on a framework that's really sitting at a fascinating crossroads.
It is. It's right at the intersection of, on the one hand, a really deep religious obligation, and on the other, some very high-stakes geopolitical engineering.
Exactly. Our mission here is to get under the hood of the moral and strategic architecture of a proposed collective defense alliance. You might have heard it referred to as a Muslim NATO. But we're going to zero in on the core justification for this massive undertaking. And that's a concept that the source material itself brands as the sacred shield.
And this is really essential to understand. It's not just another piece of military doctrine. We're looking at the foundation, the very moral axis that is supposed to legitimize this entire security structure.
And the stakes are high.
They're incredibly high. The primary documents we have, they define it explicitly. The goal is the perpetual defense of Islam's most revered places. Specifically, we're talking about the Kaaba, Medina, and Al-Aqsa.
The opening statement of the main document we're looking at, it just sets this incredibly elevated, almost poetic tone right from the start.
It does. It's very evocative.
It positions this whole alliance as a matter of civilizational survival. It says, and I'm quoting here, "The heart of a nation beats in its holy places. The soul of a civilization is guarded by its sanctuaries. For the Muslim world, protecting the Kaaba, Medina, and Al-Aqsa is not just duty, it is destiny."
That is some potent language.
It really is. It immediately transforms what could be a dry security proposal into something that feels like a non-negotiable spiritual mandate.
Precisely. And that's the key. That language elevates the entire discussion past conventional military strategy, past economic pacts. It puts it on another level entirely.
So our objective today is to really dissect this sacred shield framework.
Yeah.
We want to see how it's presented as that central moral justification.
Yeah.
And we're going to focus entirely on how the documents we have show this process of institutionalizing a deeply held religious devotion into a concrete transnational strategic defense apparatus.
It's a really big task.
It is. So as we start this deep dive, we have to pose a core question to you, our listener. How is the institutionalization of religious devotion designed to fundamentally transform traditional strategic defense? Because that difficult, bureaucratic, and let's be honest, highly sensitive transformation is what this entire sacred shield is built on.
Let's get into it.
So let's unpack this. Okay, so we have to start with the core definition. This concept, the sacred shield. It's clearly being positioned as much more than just a defensive border or a typical military alliance. According to the sources, how is it conceptually framed?
Well, the framework presents the sacred shield as the alliance's moral axis. That's the specific term they use. It's philosophical center of gravity.
It's a center of gravity. I like that.
It functions as this explicit recognition that any successful, enduring civilization, and in this case, that means the global Muslim community, has to ground its legitimacy in something.
Right. It has to define itself.
Exactly. It defines its identity by establishing what it considers non-negotiably sacred, and therefore what it commits to protecting above all other concerns. For this proposed alliance, that protection is laser-focused on those central holy sites.
And the document, it really crystallizes this with that one phrase you mentioned earlier. It calls it devotion institutionalized. That, to me, suggests a really challenging leap. You're taking something that is deeply personal, a spiritual commitment, and you're trying to translate it directly into international law, into geopolitical bureaucracy, and into military logistics.
It is a massive leap.
It feels like the moment where a heartfelt belief has to become a binding security commitment.
And that difficulty, that challenge you're pointing to, is precisely why the framework mandates a strategic merger, a fusion.
A fusion of what?
A fusion of two powerful, very necessary, but also very distinct elements. The thinking is, to make the sacred shield functional and legitimate in the eyes of the entire Muslim world, you absolutely need two things. You need strategic capability, and you need uncontested spiritual legitimacy. One without the other just doesn't work.
And this brings us immediately to the roles of Pakistan and Saudi Arabia in this proposal. They're clearly delineated.
Very clearly.
Pakistan is tasked with providing what the document calls the force.
Yes, the force.
Which means providing the strategic credibility,
Yeah.
the military hardware, the command structure, and all the technical expertise you'd need for a modern defense operation.
And you can't overstate how critical that reliance on Pakistan is. The source material suggests that for this alliance to be taken seriously, it needs a partner with a proven, modern, large-scale military infrastructure.
So not just a concept, but real-world capability.
Exactly. Sophisticated command and control capabilities. The force role is defined by this strategic credibility that's been derived from decades of maintaining a large, disciplined, and very integrated military establishment. That credibility is framed as essential for the Sacred Shield to be taken seriously on the world stage.
Okay, so that's the force. Then on the other side of the coin, you have Saudi Arabia, which provides the faith.
The faith is...
It leverages its unique spiritual authority as the custodian of the two holy mosques. So if Pakistan is the military brain and the muscle,
then Saudi Arabia is the moral and spiritual heart. Absolutely. That's the perfect analogy.
so the spiritual legitimacy is the part that can't be negotiated.
It's the non-negotiable element. The whole thing falls apart without it. Without the authority that comes from its role as custodian, any defense pact that's centered on Makkah and Medina would just be viewed as politically motivated.
Or illegitimate.
Or illegitimate, exactly, by huge segments of the global Muslim population. The Sacred Shield is functionally dependent on this partnership to achieve both things at once: military effectiveness and moral consensus.
So they're defining a joint mandate here. It sounds like strategic might is being put in the service of spiritual duty.
That's the core idea. One serves the other.
Okay, so then what's the operational outcome of this merger, this fusion of force and faith?
The operational manifestation, as the documents call it, is the establishment of the first ever Sacred Sites Protection Command.
The first ever. Why is that insistence on the first ever designation so important here?
Yeah.
In the context of global security, what signal does that send?
It's a very deliberate political signal. It's asserting autonomy and specificity. First, it's a critique of existing frameworks.
How so?
It's implicitly stating that other international bodies, like the United Nations or previous regional pacts, have either failed to prioritize these sites or have failed to adequately protect them.
So it's filling a perceived vacuum.
Precisely. And second, it grants this command a unique, hyper-focused mandate that is, in theory, insulated from the broader, often much more contentious political and economic demands that you'd find in a general defense alliance.
That insulation seems key. It almost sounds like they're trying to create a bespoke, highly focused military arm whose whole reason for being, its raison d'etre, is so specific.
The protection of spiritual heartlands.
Right. That it should, theoretically, be immune to the kind of political compromises or, mission creep that typically plague these big transnational organizations.
That is the core hypothesis of the entire project. The command is designed to be permanent, proactive, and singularly focused on that one mission.
And logistically, what does that imply?
It implies dedicated budgets, it implies specialized training pipelines for its forces, separate intelligence fusion systems, all of it focused purely on the protection of these specific sites, and just as importantly, their surrounding logistical infrastructure.
Like the massive operations for the Hajj pilgrimage.
Exactly. Think of the complexity of the Hajj. Protecting that is part of the mandate. So this concept, the Sacred Shield, it's the moral warrant that's being used to justify the creation and, crucially, the sustained investment into this highly specialized military bureaucracy.
Okay, so to really understand the weight of this modern proposal, we have to look backward, which is exactly what the source material does. It makes it very clear that this duty of sacred defense is not some modern innovation.
Not at all.
It claims there's a deep historical precedent, and it frames this new alliance as the necessary modernization of an ancient, already established tradition.
The source material is very, very keen to establish a sense of continuity. It's suggesting that this is not a new policy being invented out of thin air.
It's a restoration.
It's a strategic restoration and an evolution of a mandate that already exists. And it traces this duty all the way back to the very earliest examples of Islamic defense. It cites the historical precedent set by the Prophet Muhammad himself.
Right, the document really stresses that point, that the Prophet personally led campaigns to defend Makkah and Medina from external aggression. And that sets the foundational example. It establishes that defense is an active, necessary, and very high-level endeavor. It's not something to be, delegated to some minor local forces and forgotten about.
And here's where you see the critical transition happening, the shift from those personal defense campaigns to a formal institutional mandate.
which is the direct parallel to the Sacred Shield proposal today.
It's the direct parallel. The early caliphs, they recognize that the defense of the Haramain, that's the two holy sanctuaries, had to be formalized. It needed to become a standing, professional, and ethical mandate.
And that led to something specific.
It did. It led to the establishment of the Haram Protection Forces.
Can you tell us more about what the source material says about these forces? What defined their institutional character back then?
The definition provided is highly specific. They weren't just, a local militia or some generalized soldiers assigned to guard duty.
So they were specialized.
Highly specialized. They were characterized by rigorous discipline, specific training that was dedicated to the sanctity of their mission, and what the source calls a high moral elevation.
A moral elevation. What does that mean in practice?
It means that their mission dictated that the ethical requirements for these soldiers had to be perhaps even higher than for standard military forces.
Because of where they were operating.
Precisely. It reflected the sanctity of the ground they were tasked to defend. This moral and functional separation was a foundational principle. They established a clear operational distinction between the forces that were dedicated to general defense of the state and those dedicated purely to sacred defense.
That's fascinating. So the very act of institutionalizing the specialized duty led directly to a formal principle within Islamic military ethics.
It did.
And that gives this modern Sacred Shield proposal a profound historical weight to draw upon.
Indeed. The source material highlights the explicit principle that emerged from this period and then maintained its weight across centuries. And that principle is, the defense of the haram is defense of faith.
Wow. That's a powerful statement.
It's the theological bedrock of the entire modern proposal. It directly connects the physical, strategic defense of a geographical location to the spiritual integrity of the entire global faith community.
So it establishes that this is not merely a political dispute or a territorial one.
It makes it an action of existential necessity. An attack on the place is an attack on the faith itself.
So if we're looking at this through the lens of the source material, when Pakistan and Saudi Arabia propose the Sacred Shield today, they're doing a lot more than just negotiating another mutual defense treaty.
Much more. They are explicitly invoking a recognized centuries-old duty that was formalized by the earliest leaders of the community.
And that instantly grants a deep legitimacy, at least in their framing, for military action that's focused purely on these specific sites.
It acts as a powerful anchor against criticism, particularly any criticism that might come from within the Muslim world. Any big strategic military plan like this requires massive internal buy-in.
That's clear.
So by grounding this Muslim NATO concept in this pre-existing non-negotiable religious duty, the argument is that it transforms the arrangement. It's no longer a potentially opportunistic political agreement.
It becomes what?
It becomes a fulfillment of an enduring historical and ethical mandate. It reframes the entire project.
So, if the discipline and the specialized nature of those early Haram protection forces were the foundation of the mandate in the past, how do the threats of the modern world necessitate a total re-architecture of that discipline?
That's the pivot. That's the whole point of this new proposal. The historical mandate provides the moral justification, the why.
Right.
But the sheer complexity of modern threats means the response has to evolve. It has to go from, mounted guards and small garrisons to these sophisticated, integrated, multinational commands.
Which is exactly what the Sacred Shield intends to establish.
Exactly. The discipline of the past has to now incorporate skills in cyber warfare and drone defense right alongside traditional military training. The principle is ancient, but the application has to be cutting edge. #Tag3. Modern threats and the need for integrated defense.
Okay, so the historical mandate defines the why, as you said, but it's the modern threats that really dictate the highly complex how. So now we need to analyze the vulnerabilities these sacred spaces are facing, which seem to extend far beyond the kind of traditional state-on-state aggression that the early caliphs had to deal with.
We really do need to categorize these vulnerabilities comprehensively because that's what the source material does. And they're so varied that they necessitate a complex, multi-layered security response.
It's not just one type of threat.
Not at all. It spans conventional warfare, insurgency, digital attacks, political manipulation. It's a full 360-degree threat assessment.
So let's start with the one that's cited in the documents as a continuous pressure point, the Al-Aqsa crisis.
This is discussed in depth, and it's framed as a really unique challenge. It's one that requires more of a diplomatic and a paramilitary response rather than, say, sending in conventional tanks.
Why is that?
Because the threat here is described as continuous and incremental. It's not a single event. It's daily incursions by unauthorized groups, it's explicit acts of desecration, and it's the constant political and demographic manipulation that's designed to erode the site's status over time.
So it's a slow burn, not a sudden attack.
Exactly. Al-Aqsa, because of its location and its political context, faces an existential threat that is less about a single kinetic attack and more about the incremental loss of control and the loss of its historical integrity. It's death by 1,000 cuts.
And the argument in the source is that this requires a permanent proactive mechanism for immediate monitoring and intervention, something that traditional, slow-moving defense packs are just ill-equipped to handle. So the focus here is on rapid response to these localized, often non-state provocations.
Precisely. The source suggests that the Sacred Shield needs institutional teeth that are ready to activate at a moment's notice to counter these incremental losses. And that's a fundamentally different kind of preparation than getting ready for a conventional border war.
But the threat isn't just defined by external political pressure or state actors. The document makes a very specific and I think crucial point of addressing internal sectarian vulnerabilities as well.
This is a critical distinction, and it really defines the scope of the Sacred Shield as something more than just a regional bloc defense against an outside enemy.
Right, it's not just about us versus them.
No. The source is explicit that the alliance must address the internal danger that's posed by sectarian militias and extremist non-state actors. It specifically references the systematic targeting and destruction of shrines in theaters like Iraq, Syria, and Yemen.
Which shows the alliance would need a mandate to act against non-state actors who threaten the integrity of religious sites across the region, regardless of the host country's political allegiance. That seems complicated.
Very complicated.
What specific ideological differences are driving this internal sectarian targeting that the source cites? What's the root of that problem?
The sources outline that the threat often stems from extremist interpretations of the faith that deem certain sacred structures like shrines, historical mosques, or even graves of important figures as heretical innovations.
And therefore they need to be destroyed.
And that justifies their destruction in the eyes of these groups. This places a heavy onus on the Sacred Shield. It's not only about protecting the major, universally agreed upon sites like Makkah, Madinah, and Al-Aqsa.
It's broader.
It's potentially about assisting in the coordinated defense of other high-value, high-risk religious heritage sites across the whole region that are vulnerable to this kind of ideological extremism. It highlights a painful internal vulnerability that can't be ignored if the Sacred Shield is to claim it offers comprehensive protection.
And then we pivot completely. From these political and sectarian threats to the technological frontier.
Yes.
This is where the threats to Makkah and Medina themselves require a total overhaul of traditional defense strategies. We're talking about asymmetric threats here.
Deeply asymmetric threats. You're talking about things like cyber attacks and drone warfare against targets that receive millions of pilgrims every single year.
These are targets with massive civilian populations.
They are profoundly asymmetric because they target high-density, highly complex logistical systems. Just imagine for a second a coordinated, low-cost drone swarm attack on Makkah during the peak of the Hajj season.
The devastation would be unimaginable.
The potential for catastrophic loss of life and the spiritual trauma from an event like that is immense.
And it's not just physical.
No. Similarly, a coordinated cyber attack could cripple the sophisticated digital logistics that are required to manage millions of pilgrims. Things like traffic control, medical services, water supply.
It would turn organizational complexity into organizational collapse.
Instantaneously. And this demands so much more than traditional air defenses. It requires integrated, multi-domain security systems that are built for the 21st century.
Okay, so this is where the specific proposed solutions of this Muslim NATO concept become so critical. It's not just a call for more investment. It's proposing specific high-tech integration.
Exactly. The proposed joint response mechanism is designed to be, for lack of a better term, future-proofed. It calls explicitly for joint AI-driven monitoring and satellite surveillance.
And the AI component seems to be the key analytical leap here.
It is. It implies using machine learning to process real-time input from thousands of cameras, sensors, communication streams. Basically everything.
And it's looking for what?
It's looking for patterns, predicting vulnerabilities, and flagging anomalies far, far faster than any team of human operators ever could.
So this is a shift in security philosophy from being purely reactive to being predictive.
It's the ultimate goal.
But let's explore the technical implications here for a second, because AI monitoring, especially when it's deployed by a multinational command, it raises some really complex questions.
It does.
What specific data would this command be fusing? And what are the political implications of, say, foreign AI systems from Pakistan monitoring the movement of millions of pilgrims inside Saudi Arabia?
That's the billion-dollar question. The fusion would have to encompass everything from atmospheric surveillance and drone trajectory analysis to digital footprint monitoring of logistical systems. And the political implication is enormous.
It sounds like it.
The document implicitly accepts that there has to be a level of shared sovereignty over security data in the interest of sacred defense.
Shared sovereignty, that's a huge step for any nation to take.
It's a massive concession. The framework suggests that the ownership of that data must be ceded, at least in part, to the Sacred Sites Protection Command, even if the physical location is in Saudi Arabia. And that's to ensure a unified, instantaneous strategic response. This acceptance of shared intelligence oversight is a huge political hurdle that's necessary to counter novel threats like swarming drones or a sophisticated cyber intrusion.
So if we connect this all back to the bigger picture, these technological solutions, they reflect a fundamental shift. It's a shift from a security model that's focused on defending broad territorial lines to one that's focused on defending very specific, high-value, hypersensitive targets.
And those targets are vulnerable to both state and non-state actors and to both physical and digital attacks. The complexity is just exponential compared to traditional defense.
So the integrated defense system is the institutional response that's required by this modern threat landscape.
That's what the sources make clear. To fulfill this concept of destiny and the defense of faith, the Sacred Shield must employ the most advanced predictive and kinetic tools that are available anywhere in the world.
So the entire concept of the Sacred Shield is built on this fusion, this merger of Pakistan's force and Saudi Arabia's faith. Now we need to really get into the details and examine the precise operational division of labor.
Right. How do they move from this, philosophical ideal to a functional, on-the-ground reality?
Yeah.
Well, the roles are meticulously detailed in the documents, and it's all designed to leverage the unique comparative advantages of each nation.
So they're not stepping on each other's toes.
The goal is to prevent unnecessary redundancy and maximize efficiency. Each side brings something unique to the table that the other lacks.
Okay, so let's start with Pakistan's specific contribution, the force, the strategic shield. In concrete operational terms, what does Pakistan bring to this Sacred Sites Protection Command?
Pakistan is positioned as the strategic backbone of the whole operation. It's the provider of what the source calls institutionalized expertise.
What does that entail?
First, it's tasked with providing strategic command. That means setting the overarching operational planning, defining the rules of engagement, and creating the execution framework for this multinational force.
So they're the architects of the strategy.
Yeah, they're the architects. Second, it contributes its specialized special forces expertise. And given the nature of modern threats, we're talking counterterrorism, hostage rescue, rapid intervention in complex urban environments, Pakistan's special forces are designated as essential for any immediate, high-stakes tactical deployments.
Okay, so command and special forces. And crucially, the intelligence function is also assigned to Pakistan. They're supposed to lead intelligence coordination for the entire mission. What does that mean in practical terms for the command?
In practice, it means Pakistan is responsible for creating a single, unified intelligence picture.
Wow.
By fusing data from all the participating member states, from external partners, and from the command's own high-tech monitoring systems we just talked about, the AI, the satellites, everything.
So it's the central hub for all information.
Exactly. This responsibility confirms Pakistan's role as the operational brain of the outfit. It's meant to ensure the shield can deploy effectively and crucially intelligently. The goal is to be preempting threats rather than just reacting to them.
But this has to create some potential friction. I mean, it implies that Pakistani generals would, at least functionally, be holding the reins of the day-to-day operations and tactical decisions for the Sacred Sites Protection Command.
It does.
And that command is operating on Saudi soil. How does the document address the chain of command during, say, a localized crisis near Makkah? Who's in charge?
That tension is implicit, but the framework does try to address it through a shared structure. While Pakistan provides the operational command expertise, Saudi Arabia provides the spiritual justification and, critically, the local control.
So how is a crisis decision made?
The sources suggest that the chain of command is resolved by defining very specific zones of operation. The Sacred Sites Protection Command operates under the strategic direction of the Joint Council of Defense Ministers,
So a political body.
a high-level political body. But the tactical execution on Saudi soil would require immediate sign-off from and integration with high-level Saudi internal security protocols. The presence of these multinational rapid reaction units is a political reality they have to manage very, very carefully to avoid infringing on local sovereignty.
I can imagine. So in contrast, Saudi Arabia's specific contribution is centered entirely around the faith, the sacred trust. And that starts with its fundamental role as the custodian of the two holy mosques.
That custodianship is the moral license for the entire project. It's the spiritual leadership that's necessary to authorize a defense pact of this nature in the eyes of the global Muslim population.
It's what gives it legitimacy.
It assures everyone that the defense mechanism is serving the sacred duty, not just the political interests of a particular state. Furthermore, on a practical level, Saudi Arabia offers essential logistical leadership.
Of course, the sites are within its borders.
Right. And managing the vast logistical requirements, housing, supplying, supporting a permanent integrated defense force that's operating around Makkah and Medina, that requires deep local expertise and the commitment of huge national resources.
So when you put it all together, the unified mission is born from this almost perfect practical symbiosis.
That's the idea.
Pakistan provides the sophisticated military machinery and the strategic know-how. Saudi Arabia provides the spiritual justification and the physical platform to operate from. This dual role is designed to ensure the Sacred Shield is both militarily capable and morally unimpeachable.
And the institutional birth of this unified mission, the moment it becomes real, is tied to a very specific, concrete future legal instrument.
The 2025 Pakistan-Saudi Defense Pact.
Exactly.
That date, 2025, and the specific pact itself, they provide the necessary concrete legal framework. The document specifies that this pact will include explicit provisions just for sacred sites protection.
So it's not an afterthought.
It's not an appendix or a sideline. It's presented as the official, institutionalized start date of this unified mission.
It forces the action. It moves the conversation from concept to reality. It transforms these conceptual discussions about the Sacred Shield into a ratified, binding military commitment between the two primary partners.
And what's its role beyond that?
Importantly, this pact serves as the foundation. It's the cornerstone upon which other potential Muslim NATO members will later join, specifically by ratifying the subsequent charter that builds on this. It's the moment that formalizes the spiritual duty into a hard legal requirement.
All right, this next section feels like it represents the true leap in complexity for this whole project. We're now exploring how an abstract religious responsibility is formally transformed into concrete strategic governance.
We're moving from the why to the how.
And we're doing it through this proposed treaty known as the Sacred Sites Protection Charter, or SSPC. This is essentially the operational paperwork of devotion.
That's a great way to put it. This charter is designed to sit directly under the proposed overarching Muslim Defense Treaty, but it has a singular focus. It deals exclusively with the non-negotiable mission of sacred defense. The SSPC is the instrument that provides the Sacred Shield with its legal mandate and its operational teeth.
So let's break down the 5 pillars of the SSPC in detail, because these really define the multi-layered security framework they're trying to build. We have to start with Pillar 1. Jurisdiction.
And jurisdiction is perhaps the most radically transformative pillar of the whole charter.
Why you say that?
Because this pillar establishes the authority of the Sacred Sites Protection Command to intervene and act on attacks or threats to holy places. This is an incredibly complex legal area because it asserts the right of this international alliance, the Muslim NATO, to assume a defense right over specific holy sites.
A right that could potentially override traditional notions of national sovereignty.
Exactly. When those sites are threatened, this charter suggests a new kind of jurisdiction comes into play.
That is a colossal legal implication. How does this proposed SSPC jurisdiction compare to, say, a widely known framework like NATO's Article 5? Or the idea of the right to intervene? How does it stack up in terms of severity?
Well, NATO's Article 5 is geographically defined. An attack on one member state is an attack on all.
Yeah.
The SSPC, according to the source material, is different. It's theologically and thematically defined. Its jurisdiction isn't determined by who is attacked, but by what is attacked.
It's a critical
A
difference.
huge difference. Furthermore, Article 5 is generally reactive. It responds to a kinetic attack on a member state. The SSPC appears to allow for a more proactive mandate. It focuses on threats to the integrity of the sites, which is a much broader and more ambiguous term than attack.
And this is critical. How does the document address the legal framework for intervention against non-state actors, or even against non-member states who might be operating near or threatening these sites? Does this charter implicitly allow for something like hot pursuit or cross-border interdiction?
The document's reliance on this mandate of collective sacred defense implies that threats to the holy sites are threats to all the signatories of the charter, and that grants a moral justification for preemptive action.
So it's not just defensive.
It has a preemptive quality. While the text doesn't explicitly use a term like hot pursuit, the broad definition of jurisdiction over threats to holy places, not just confirmed attacks, suggests a legal framework that is designed to minimize delay and allow for rapid action. And this is where the major diplomatic hurdles are going to be.
You think so?
Absolutely. Asserting a defense right that potentially conflicts with the sovereignty of adjacent non-member states is a major strategic risk that this alliance would have to manage very carefully.
Okay, that's a lot to unpack on jurisdiction alone. Let's move to Pillar 2. The establishment of permanent rapid reaction units. This seems to be the physical manifestation of that need for speed.
That's exactly what it is. This pillar dictates that defense cannot be a committee action that takes weeks to approve. There must be highly trained units on permanent rotation and on standby, dedicated exclusively to this one mission.
So they're always ready to go.
Always. This ensures an immediate response capability for any sudden threats, whether it's a quick, low-flying drone incursion or an internal security breach that's fueled by some extremist ideology. These forces are specialized, they're multinational, and crucially, they are perpetually ready.
But I have to ask again about the friction. What the permanent presence of these multinational rapid reaction units, especially if they include Pakistani or other non-Saudi forces, creates significant tension with Saudi internal security forces, especially in the hypersensitive zones of Makkah and Medina. How does the document suggest that day-to-day command and control is managed on the ground?
That is the ultimate operational challenge, and the SSPC framework attempts to mitigate it. It does so by ensuring that the rapid reaction units operate under a unified but dual-layered operational command structure.
Dual layer.
Yes. The strategic command rests with the Sacred Sites Protection Command, which is likely to be led by Pakistani expertise. But the tactical deployment within the two holy mosques would need immediate authorization from and integration with Saudi internal security leadership.
So a Saudi commander on the ground has to give the green light.
Essentially, yes. This is to prevent sovereign infringement, or, just as bad, confusion during a live crisis. It demands unprecedented levels of trust and joint training to make sure that operational overlap is seamless, not chaotic.
Okay, let's discuss Pillar 3. Joint intelligence fusion. We touched on the AI monitoring earlier, but what does this pillar mean institutionally for intelligence gathering?
It necessitates creating a unified center that is dedicated specifically to religious site protection intelligence. This is key because the threats, as we've discussed, are often ideological and non-conventional.
They're not just tracking tank movements.
Exactly. They require highly specialized intelligence gathering that's focused on patterns of religious radicalization, on sectarian targeting rhetoric, on tracking specific extremist communication networks, and on assessing cyber vulnerabilities. All of that is very distinct from traditional military intelligence. This fusion center pools those specialized resources and technology to preempt ideological threats.
So this specialized fusion center is focused less on state armies and more on identifying the intellectual and logistical precursors to religiously motivated threats against sacred heritage.
You've nailed it. It is the counter-ideology and counter-terrorism brain of the alliance. It provides the predictive analysis that then informs the deployment of those rapid reaction units.
Now, Pillar 4 seems to expand the mission beyond immediate kinetic defense. It's called Cultural Heritage Preservation Units. Why is this designated as a defense function within a military charter? It seems a bit unusual.
It does, but it demonstrates a really sophisticated awareness that an attack on a sacred site is rarely just a physical event.
It's symbolic.
It's an attempt to erase the historical and cultural memory of a civilization. So these units would be tasked with the long-term defense against neglect, against politically motivated architectural erasure, or with leading conservation efforts immediately following an attack.
So they're like first responders for heritage.
In a way, yes. They ensure the physical and historical integrity of the sites is maintained, even if those sites are situated in conflict zones or politically contested areas. It's about protecting the memory and the structural integrity as a critical element of defense.
That adds a really interesting layer of depth. It's about protecting the structural continuity of the faith, not just preventing immediate bombings. Finally, we have Pillar 5, which addresses accountability.
And accountability is what holds the whole thing together. It defines the reporting structure, and that's designed to ensure political commitment and prevent mission creep.
How does it do that?
By requiring the Sacred Sites Protection Command to report directly before the Council of Defense Ministers, which is the highest political body of the alliance, the SSPC guarantees high-level oversight. This links the operational actions on the ground directly back to the strategic and political leadership. It's a check and balance.
And that prevents the Sacred Sites Protection Command from acting unilaterally or becoming some kind of rogue, decentralized force.
That is the intention.
So if we summarize all this, these 5 pillars, they really do create a comprehensive, multi-layered security framework. You have the legal right to act,
Jurisdiction,
the physical capability to act,
their rapid reaction units.
the specialized knowledge to inform the action,
That's the intelligence fusion.
the commitment to long-term integrity,
Cultural heritage preservation.
and finally, the necessary political control.
Accountability, yes. The SSPC, if implemented as written, would successfully take a deeply serious religious responsibility and transform it into structured, strategic governance. The aim is to make the defense mechanism robust, permanent, and subject to collective political scrutiny. #Tag6. The moral and civilizational power of protection.
Okay, we spent a lot of time dissecting the mechanics, the legal frameworks, the military structure.
Mm-hmm.
The core of this Sacred Shield proposal, as the document repeatedly insists, is not ultimately military. It's moral and civilizational.
Mm-hmm.
The document insists that the very existence of the shield provides a psychological and strategic benefit that extends far beyond just troop deployments or drone defenses.
This is the critical so what of the entire framework. It's the ultimate goal.
Yeah.
And the ultimate moral outcome that the Sacred Shield is designed to achieve is what the source calls the restoration of dignity.
The restoration of dignity. And that's for the 2 billion Muslims globally who, the source argues, currently suffer from a profound sense that their holiest spaces are politically vulnerable. Exposed, exactly. That vulnerability, that sense of powerlessness when sacred sites are under threat, is cited as a major source of emotional distress and even regional instability.
It is. When these sites face constant incursions, political manipulation, or outright physical desecration, the source argues that it registers as a direct attack on the collective identity and the dignity of the entire community.
So establishing this formalized, powerful defense apparatus sends a message.
It sends an immediate, clear psychological message, and that message is, this period of vulnerability is ending. The community is mobilizing an organized, sophisticated means of self-protection. It's a statement of agency.
And this restoration of dignity is directly linked to another crucial change the framework is trying to engineer, a shift in mindset.
A very important one, the shift from reaction to organization.
Tell us more about that.
This is arguably the most profound strategic claim in the entire document. Currently, responses to threats against sacred sites, and you see this most clearly with Al-Aqsa, are often characterized by what the source calls reactive emotion.
Spontaneous outrage.
Exactly. Spontaneous outrage, large-scale protests, uncoordinated political condemnations from various leaders. And while those reactions are emotionally powerful and immediate, the source suggests they fundamentally lack strategic depth and permanence.
They flare up and then they die down.
They dissipate, and the threats often resume right after.
So the Sacred Shield proposes to replace that powerful but ultimately short-lived emotional reaction with something else.
With organized protection.
Which means
proactive, institutionalized, standing defense. The fundamental strategic shift is moving from merely responding to an event after it happens, like the past failures to prevent the destruction of shrines in conflict zones, to having permanent mechanisms in place.
like the Rapid Reaction Units and the Joint Intelligence Fusion Center.
Precisely. Mechanisms that are designed to prevent or at least mitigate the threat before it can escalate. The framework argues that this shift fundamentally transforms regional politics. It empowers a measured, strategic, and unified response rather than an emotional or factional one.
So the very existence of the shield, even if the Sacred Sites Protection Command rarely has to intervene kinetically, possesses an immense moral authority in and of itself.
That's the theory. Because it guarantees the institutional backing for the defense of the civilization's spiritual soul. It guarantees continuity.
And the final definition that's offered by the source material, it seems to encapsulate this duality perfectly.
It does. The Sacred Shield is emphatically defined as not merely an army.
It's defined as a manifestation of faith, unity, and moral authority.
Which brings us full circle.
It really does. It's the strategic embodiment of a shared religious duty, but it's institutionalized and supported by modern military infrastructure.
It provides the infrastructure for a moral consensus. By making the defense of these sacred sites the alliance's central unifying mission, it grants the entire Muslim NATO structure what it sees as an unassailable moral mandate.
A mandate that transcends the traditional, often contentious military goals that are usually focused on, national resources or territory.
Exactly. In this framing, the faith aspect is what makes the force legitimate, and the force is what makes the faith secure. #outro.
This has been an intensely detailed deep dive into the strategic architecture of the Sacred Shield. We've really tried to synthesize how this concept is built on what's presented as a non-negotiable moral consensus.
And that consensus is strategically merging Pakistan's military command, the force, with Saudi Arabia's spiritual authority, the faith.
We also analyzed the deep historical roots of this duty, tracing it all the way back to the institutionalization of those Haram protection forces under the early caliphs.
Which demonstrates that the modern proposal is being framed as an evolution of a centuries-old mandate, not something new.
And crucially, we detail the necessity for this kind of integrated high-tech defense against all these novel threats.
Everything from the incremental political pressure on Al-Aqsa to the advanced cyber and drone warfare vulnerabilities that are facing the massive logistical infrastructure of Makkah and Madinah.
And of course, the translation of that deep moral duty into concrete strategic governance through the Sacred Sites Protection Charter, the SSPC.
With its 5 pillars covering these really radical notions like shared jurisdiction and specialized cultural heritage preservation units.
That's what transforms this heartfelt concept into what's intended to be a formalized international military and institutional reality.
And the primary civilizational goal, as we concluded, is to move the global Muslim community from a position of reactive emotion to one of organized, proactive protection.
Fundamentally aiming to restore dignity by proving the capability for self-defense of their most sacred places.
Exactly.
So for you, our dedicated learner who seeks to get this knowledge quickly but also thoroughly, the key takeaway here is that the Sacred Shield is not just a defense plan.
No, it's much more.
It's a profound political concept rooted deeply in historical duty, and it's designed to serve as the defining moral identity of a major new security alliance. And it demands a level of strategic and spiritual alignment that is, frankly, unprecedented.
Which raises a really important final question for you to mull over as you finish listening to this deep dive.
Okay.
If the defense of a civilization's sacred sites becomes the foundational moral core of an international military alliance, what are the long-term implications that this reliance on a deeply religious commitment has for global diplomacy?
That's a great question.
Does basing a security mandate on such a non-negotiable spiritual duty make the alliance more resilient internally? Or does it potentially make it more rigid and less adaptable when it has to engage with an increasingly secular international system?
That tension between faith-based resilience on one hand and secular geopolitical rigidity on the other is the perfect thought to carry forward.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the fusion of faith and force.
Until next time.
Take care.